Thrown out at 17, she built a cabin inside an abandoned train car. Halvor Eriksson, who had survived 11 Dakota winters, told her, "A girl alone won't last till Christmas. When they find you in spring, the coyotes will have scattered what's left." She had 63 cents, no one within 1,000 miles, and needed 3 cords of firewood she had never cut. On January 9th, 1887, the temperature dropped 46 degrees in 7 hours. But 5 months earlier, Ingrid Thorvaldsen had never swung an axe or spent a single night alone. The wagon stopped at the edge of her father's claim on August 4th, 1886. Ingrid climbed down with nothing but the dress she wore and the 37 cents her father had pressed into her palm when his wife wasn't looking. Her stepmother Agnes watched from the doorway. 3 children clutched her skirt, Agnes's children, the ones who mattered now. "Walk east," her father said. He would not look at her. "Dickinson is 35 miles. The church ladies there might take you in." Ingrid had lived on this land for 2 years. She had helped break the sod, haul the water, preserve the food that kept them alive through last winter. None of that mattered now. Agnes had accused her of improper conduct with the Lund boy, and her father had chosen to believe it, or chosen to pretend he did, which amounted to the same thing. "If you come back," Agnes called from the doorway, "I'll have you arrested for theft. I have witnesses who'll swear you stole from us." Ingrid did not answer. She turned east and walked. She did not walk to Dickinson. She knew what happened to girls like her at church homes. They disappeared into institutions with high walls and locked doors, places where fallen women were reformed through labor and silence. She would rather die free than live caged. So she walked, but not toward help. She walked until she found something everyone else had abandoned. 3 miles west of the railroad town of Medora, in a narrow coulee that cut down toward the Little Missouri River, she found it, a Northern Pacific boxcar, derailed during the spring floods and left where it had tipped. The railroad had deemed recovery too expensive. The car lay on its side in a snowbank collecting draw, 34 feet of wood and metal that no one wanted. Ingrid climbed inside. The car was dark. It smelled of rust and old grain. The walls were wood planking over a frame, but the exterior, she could see where the roof met the walls, was sheathed in sheet metal, a weather shield. The sliding door still worked, mostly. The floor, now a wall, was solid tongue and groove lumber. It was shelter. It was hers. And it would kill her by December if she didn't solve the one problem no one thought could be solved. She pressed her hand to the metal sheathing where it showed through a gap in the wood. Cold radiated from it even in August. Iron conducted temperature. In winter, this box would become a frozen tomb, the cold bleeding through the metal walls faster than any fire could fight it. Everyone knew you couldn't heat a metal building. The veterans said so. The railroad men said so. Physics said so. Ingrid had 63 cents to her name by the time she earned 26 more doing laundry for a ranch hand's wife. She had no axe, no saw, no hammer. She had 12 weeks until winter. She needed at least 3 cords of firewood, and she had never cut a single log in her life. That was men's work back in Minnesota, back when she had a family. She was 17 years old, 5 feet 3 inches tall, and weighed 112 pounds. The nearest person willing to help was 35 miles away. The nearest person who knew she existed thought she should leave or die. 2 weeks after she found the boxcar, that person came to check on the wreck. Halvor Eriksson had worked the Northern Pacific since 1875, section foreman for the stretch between Medora and Sentinel Butte. 52 years old, Norwegian like her, with hands like old leather and eyes that had stopped expecting good news sometime around the winter his wife died of pneumonia in '82. He had survived 11 Dakota winters. He had pulled 3 frozen bodies from snowdrifts along his section of track: a cowboy in 81, a homesteader's wife in 83, a child in 85. He knew what death looked like before it arrived. He found Ingrid trying to pry boards from the boxcar's interior with a broken knife. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Living." Erickson studied the boxcar, the girl, the broken knife. He did not laugh. Men who had seen what he had seen didn't laugh at much. "You can't winter here," he said. "That car's just a metal box. Might as well sleep in a bucket. Cold goes right through iron. You'll need a proper cabin, 8 cords minimum, a stove, food stores." He shook his head. "A girl alone won't last till Christmas. When they find you in spring, the coyotes will have scattered what's left across the coulee." Ingrid kept working at the board. It wasn't coming loose, but she kept working. "I can give you a ride to Dickinson," Erickson said. "Church ladies there take in strays. It's better than dying." "No." "Why not?" She stopped, looked at him. "Because I know what they do to girls like me, and I'd rather freeze." Erickson was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to leave. "Suit yourself," he said. "I've seen enough dead to know what dying looks like. You've got the look." His wagon disappeared over the coulee's rim. Ingrid went back to her broken knife and her impossible board. 3 cords of firewood, 12 weeks, no axe, no help, no hope. If you listened to the only person who'd bothered to tell her the truth. But the truth Erickson told her was incomplete. He saw a metal box that couldn't hold heat. He didn't see what Ingrid had started to notice in the 2 weeks she'd lived inside it. And what she noticed would change everything. It happened in early September, 3 weeks after Erickson's visit. A cold rain had moved through, the first real hint of autumn. Ingrid huddled inside the boxcar, dry but shivering. The rain drummed on the metal exterior. The walls radiated chill. She pressed her hand against the sheet metal sheathing and felt the cold seeping through like water through cloth. Then she noticed the corner. In one section of the car, the interior wood planking had pulled away from the exterior metal shell. A gap of maybe 4 inches filled with nothing but air. Ingrid pressed her hand there, against the wood instead of the metal. Warmer, not warm, but warmer. She sat with that sensation for a long time as the rain fell. She thought about the root cellar on the farm in Minnesota, how it stayed cool in summer and warm in winter. Not because of the dirt, her father had explained when she was small, because of the air. Trapped air that couldn't move, couldn't carry heat away. What if she built another wall? Not against the metal, away from it. A wooden room inside the iron shell with a gap between them. The air in that gap would be trapped, still sealed. It couldn't carry the cold inward because it couldn't move. The metal exterior would stop the wind completely. No sod house could do that. Wind found every crack, every gap, every place where the earth hadn't been packed tight. But the metal was continuous. The iron shell would handle the wind. The wooden room inside would hold the heat. And if she stuffed the gap with dry grass, like the hay her father packed around the root cellar, the insulation would double. Triple, maybe. She had seen no one do this. She had read no book about it. She was a 17-year-old girl with a broken knife and 37 cents. But the physics made sense. She could feel it in the difference between the cold metal and the warmer wood in the corner. She began to plan. The boxcar was 34 feet long and 8 feet wide inside. She didn't need to heat all of it. She would build an inner room 16 feet long, 7 feet wide, at the rear of the car, away from the sliding door. 112 square feet instead of nearly 300. Half the space, half the wood to heat it. Walls would be scavenged lumber from the boxcar's damaged freight dividers and cottonwood poles from the river bottom. The gap between inner wall and outer shell would be 6 inches stuffed with dry grass. The inner room would have a small stove. She didn't know yet how she would get one, vented through the boxcar's roof. The boxcar door would become her outer door. An inner wooden door would seal the living space. 2 walls, 2 doors, 1 gap filled with grass. It would work, or it would fail, and she would die. There was no middle ground. The rain stopped. The clouds broke. Ingrid stood in the boxcar door and looked west toward the buttes, painted orange by the setting sun. 3 cords of firewood, everyone said. 8 cords for a proper cabin. But what if you weren't heating a proper cabin? What if you were heating a box inside a box, half the size, twice the insulation? Maybe 2 cords, maybe less. Still impossible without an axe. Still impossible without help, but less impossible than before. She had an idea now. That was something. That was more than she'd had yesterday. But Ingrid was not the only one who would have opinions about her idea. Marta Bjornsson came looking for her cow in late September. The Bjornsson homestead sat 2 miles north of the coulee, close enough to know about the Torvaldsen girl who'd been put out for improper conduct, far enough to pretend it wasn't their concern. Marta was 34, mother of 4 children under 10, survivor of 3 Dakota winters. She had no time for charity and no energy for hope. She found Ingrid hauling cottonwood poles from the river bottom. For a long moment, Marta just watched. The girl was thin, thinner than she'd been in August by the look of it. Her hands were wrapped in rags against the blisters. She was dragging a pole twice her length up the coulee slope, and she was doing it alone. "Building something?" Marta asked. Ingrid dropped the pole, caught her breath. Inside the car, a smaller room, walls with a gap between them, stuffed with grass. "Inside the car?" Marta frowned. "That's backwards. The iron will sweat when you heat it. Ice on the inside walls all winter long. You'll be soaked through and frozen both." "I'm going to line the metal with canvas first. Old tent scraps I found in the wreckage. The canvas catches the moisture before it freezes to the iron." Marta listened to this with the expression of someone watching a child explain why they could fly if they flapped their arms fast enough. "I've seen Germans and Norwegians and Swedes all try to outsmart a winter," Marta said. "The ones who lived did it the old way, sod and timber and more wood than you can imagine. The ones who got clever are buried in the churchyard." She paused. "You'd be better off digging a dugout. At least dirt holds warmth." "I don't have tools for a dugout. I have what's in that boxcar and what I can drag from the river." "Then you don't have enough." Marta turned to go, then stopped. "You can come for Sunday dinner. Bring washing if you have any. I'll pay in food." It wasn't kindness. It was barter and surveillance. Marta wanted to see what became of this girl without committing to save her. Ingrid understood that. She accepted anyway. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet. I've seen too many winters to believe in miracles. And what you're building?" Marta shook her head. "That would take a miracle." She left to find her cow. Ingrid went back to dragging poles. Marta was right about the condensation. That was the part Ingrid hadn't fully solved. When warm air hit cold metal, moisture formed. In summer, that meant drips. In winter, that meant ice. Ice that would melt during the day, soak everything, then freeze again at night. But the canvas might work, might catch the moisture before it froze to the metal, might give her a chance, might. She had a lot of mights and very few certainties. What she had for certain was a pile of cottonwood poles, a broken knife, and a theory about trapped air that could be wrong. October was 4 days away. The first hard frost could come any week now. She was not building fast enough, and then her stepmother came to make sure she knew it. Agnes Thorvaldsen appeared at the coulee on the 3rd day of October. Ingrid saw her coming down the slope and felt something cold settle in her chest that had nothing to do with the weather. She kept working. She was fitting poles into the frame of her inner wall, but her hands had started to shake. Agnes stopped 10 feet away. She looked at the boxcar, the half-built structure inside it. The girl who should have been dead or gone by now. "Still here," Agnes said. "I told your father you'd crawl back begging. He doesn't want you. No one does." Ingrid fitted another pole into place. Said nothing. "You should have taken that ride to Dickinson when you had the chance. The winter here." Agnes looked at the sky, the brown grass, the bare cottonwoods along the river. "The winter here kills grown men. Full-grown men with cabins and wood stores and wives to keep the fire going. What chance does a little liar have?" "I'm not a liar." "You are what I say you are?" Agnes stepped closer. "And what I say is that you made advances on the Lund boy, and when he refused you, you accused him of the same to cover your shame. That's what everyone believes. That's what your father believes. That's what they'll put in the record if I have you arrested for theft." Ingrid set down the poles she was holding. Her hands were still shaking, but her voice was steady. "I didn't steal anything. I have witnesses who will say different. Your word against a respectable married woman. Who do you think they'll believe?" Agnes smiled. It did not reach her eyes. "You'll be dead by February, and when they find what's left of you, I won't even pretend to mourn." She turned and walked back up the slope, never looking back. Ingrid stood very still for a long time after Agnes disappeared over the coulee's rim. The cold in her chest had spread to her arms, her legs. She felt frozen already. Then she picked up the pole and went back to work. Agnes needed her to die. That was the shape of it now. If Ingrid survived and returned to tell her side of the story, Agnes's lie would be exposed. The accusation against the Lund boy, the fabricated witnesses. All of it would unravel. So Ingrid had to die, or Agnes had to win. There was no outcome in which both of them were fine. Ingrid fitted the pole into place, checked the alignment, reached for another. The inner wall was half done. She had 43 salvaged boards, 47 cottonwood poles, and 28 cents left from the 63 she'd earned. The nails had cost everything else. She needed a stove. She needed more wood. She needed more time than she had. And she needed to stop thinking about Agnes because every minute spent afraid was a minute not spent building. The first frost came 9 days later. October 12th. Ice on the water bucket in the morning. Ingrid woke before dawn and saw her breath clouding in the boxcar's dark interior. The temperature had dropped below freezing in the night. She had no fire, no stove, nothing but the clothes she slept in and the thin blanket Marta Bjornsson had given her in exchange for Sunday washing. She got up, lit a candle, looked at what she'd built. The inner walls were 2/3 complete. 2 of the 4 walls framed and planked, a 3rd wall framed and waiting for boards. The gap between inner and outer shell stood empty, waiting for the dry grass she hadn't had time to gather. The structure looked like a promise half kept, like something that might become a shelter if winter would just wait a few more weeks. Winter would not wait. Ingrid worked through the daylight hours and into the evening by candlelight. Her hands had passed through blistered into calloused, the skin thick and cracked, the knuckles swollen. She had lost weight. She could feel it in how her dress hung, in how her hip bones pressed against the thin blanket at night. She was not eating enough, working too hard, eating too little, sleeping less than she should. The math didn't balance. Something would break, but not yet. Not until the walls were done. October 19th, first snow. 1 inch, melted by noon. The cottonwoods along the river had dropped their leaves. The sky was the color of old pewter. October 26th, second snow, 3 inches. It didn't melt. Ingrid stood in the boxcar door and watched the white settle over the coulee. The temperature at night was dropping below 20 degrees now. She slept in every piece of clothing she owned, including Marta Bjornsson's old shawl. The inner walls were done, all 4 of them. The ceiling frame was half built, creating a second air gap below the canted roof of the boxcar. She still had no stove. That night, a windstorm blew through. It wasn't the worst she'd seen. The boxcar was somewhat sheltered in the coulee, but it tore away the canvas sheet she'd rigged as a temporary outer door. The canvas was also her condensation barrier, the layer that would catch moisture before it froze to the metal shell. She spent 2 days finding the canvas, weighted down by snow half a mile away, 2 days pinning it back into place, reinforcing the edges with stones. 2 days lost, 2 days closer to winter, and still no stove. The stove problem had no solution Ingrid could afford. The cheapest one in Medora, a small sheet iron box stove at the hardware sire, cost $4.50. She had 11 cents. She had no labor to trade that would earn that much. No one in Medora would hire the Torvaldsen girl for $4 worth of work, and even if they would, she couldn't leave the coulee long enough to earn it without losing the building progress she'd made. She considered her options. Build a fireplace, impossible. Smoke ventilation required a real chimney, which required masonry, which required skills and materials she didn't have. An open fire inside the enclosed space would fill it with smoke and kill her faster than the cold. Trade labor. No one would give her that much work. Steal. She would not. Agnes had accused her of theft. She would not make the lie true. That left scavenging. Every railroad section had a dump pile, broken equipment, damaged tools, worn-out parts, anything not worth the cost of shipping back east for repair. The Medora section's dump pile sat behind the depot, a heap of rust and rotting wood that no one guarded because no one wanted what was in it. Ingrid walked to Medora on the first clear day after the windstorm. The dump pile was larger than she'd expected. Old barrel hoops, broken lanterns, splintered ties. And there, half buried under a collapsed crate, a sheet iron box stove, small, rusted, with a crack running across the firebox like a scar. The crack was why it had been thrown away. A cracked firebox leaked smoke. In a normal cabin, that meant a room full of fumes every time you lit a fire. The stove was useless for conventional purposes, but Ingrid wasn't building a conventional shelter. In a fully enclosed space with controlled ventilation, a stovepipe through the roof, a gap for intake, a smoke leak was manageable. Unpleasant, maybe. Dangerous if she let the room seal too tight, but not fatal, and the crack could be patched. Clay from the riverbank mixed with ash. Her father had shown her that once, fixing a cracked cookpot back in Minnesota. 50-50, he'd said. Let it cure before you fire it. The stove wasn't free, though. Nothing on railroad property was truly abandoned. It belonged to the Northern Pacific until someone from the Northern Pacific said otherwise. And the only Northern Pacific man Ingrid knew was Halvor Eriksson. She found him at the section house, mending a broken rail jack. He looked up when she approached. His expression didn't change. It never seemed to change, but something in his posture shifted. Wariness, maybe, or curiosity about why the girl he'd told to leave was still alive 6 weeks later. Came to take that ride to Dickinson? He asked. No. Then what? There's a stove in your dump pile, cracked firebox. No good for a cabin. I want it. Erickson set down the rail jack. That thing's useless. Fill a room with smoke before it warmed a mouse. I don't need to warm a room. I need to warm a box inside a box. He looked at her then. Really looked. She was thinner than she'd been in August, her face sharper, her hands wrapped in rags that didn't fully hide the cracked and bleeding knuckles. But her eyes were the same as they'd been when she refused his ride, clear and steady and utterly unwilling to quit. "What do you want for it?" she asked. Erickson could have given it to her. The stove was trash, worth nothing to the railroad, but he understood in that moment that a gift would insult her. "Wash my clothes for a month," he said. "Sundays. I'll provide the soap." "Done." He hauled the stove to the coulee himself. It was the first time he'd been back since August. What he saw made him stop at the coulee's rim. The boxcar was transformed. Where there had been an empty shell, there was now a structure inside a structure. Wooden walls standing 6 inches away from the metal exterior, the gap between them waiting to be filled with insulation. A ceiling frame, an inner door. Everything rough-hewn and imperfect, but everything there. He didn't say it looked good. Erickson wasn't the type. But he carried the stove down to the boxcar door and helped her wrestle it inside. "The crack," he said, before he left. "Patch it with clay and ash, 50-50. Let it cure before you fire it." "I know." He nodded, started up the slope, then stopped. "You've done more than I thought you would." The words came out like they cost him something. "But this?" He gestured at the sky, the early snow, the wind starting to rise. "This is the easy part. What's coming, I don't know if that thing you've built will hold. Nobody does. And by the time you find out, it'll be too late to change anything." He left. Ingrid stood in the boxcar door, watching him go. The temperature dropped another 4 degrees before sunrise. November arrived. Ingrid worked every daylight hour and some that weren't. The stove was installed. The cracked firebox patched with clay and ash. The stovepipe run through the boxcar's roof. She sealed the gaps in the inner walls with mud from the riverbank, pressed into every crack while her fingers went numb. The air gap. The 6-inch space between her inner walls and the metal shell was the last piece. She needed to fill it with dry grass, and she needed enough to fill 120 linear feet of gap, 6 inches wide and 6 feet tall. Marta Bjornsson told her where to find it. "There's a hay rake abandoned 3 miles south," Marta said at Sunday dinner. "Peterson family. They left for Minnesota last year. There's a pile of old hay still there, molded on the outside but dry in the middle if you dig deep." It was the first real help Marta had offered. Ingrid looked at her, unsure what to say. "Don't," Marta said. "I'm not going soft. I just don't want to watch you die from something fixable. The cold will kill you either way, most likely, but it won't be because you didn't know where to find dry grass." Ingrid made 14 trips to the Peterson claim over 5 days. She carried grass in bundles on her back, stumbling over the frozen ground, arms aching, lungs burning in the cold air. Each trip took 3 hours. Each bundle filled maybe 8 feet of gap. By the time she finished, the inner walls were sealed with mud, and the gap was stuffed solid with grass from floor to ceiling. She hung the canvas scraps against the metal exterior, tacking them in place to catch condensation. The inner room was complete. 112 square feet, walls insulated with 6 inches of dead air and dry grass, a stove that worked mostly, a door that sealed mostly, a ceiling that held heat instead of losing it through the boxcar's metal roof. On November 5th, she lit the first fire. The stove smoked at first. The patched crack leaked worse than she'd hoped. But after an hour, the clay sealed tighter against the heat. The smoke diminished to a thin haze, then to almost nothing. She sat in the inner room with the door closed and waited. Outside, the temperature was 14 degrees above zero. Inside, after 2 hours, it was 52. A 38-degree difference, with less than half a cord of wood burned. Ingrid pressed her hand against the inner wall. warm. She pressed her hand against the air gap, as far as she could reach into it. Cool, but not cold. She pressed her hand against the metal exterior, where the canvas hung. Cold. Ice cold. Frost already forming on the canvas. But the frost was on the canvas, not in the room. The moisture was trapped where she had planned to trap it. The cold was held where she'd planned to hold it. The design worked, but this was November. 14 degrees was a cool autumn night, not winter. The real test. The 40 below nights. The blizzards that buried cattle standing upright. The cold that killed men in their beds. That was still coming. Marta Bjornsson visited in mid-November. "It's clever, I'll give you that," she said, standing in Ingrid's inner room. The space was crude, rough lumber, mud chinking, a floor of packed earth covered with old canvas. But it was warm, warmer than Marta's own cabin, which leaked heat through every gap in the sod. "But this isn't winter," Marta continued. "This is autumn with a cold streak. Wait until January. Wait until it drops to 40 below and stays there for a week. That metal shell will be a frozen tomb." "Maybe," Ingrid said. "Maybe isn't good enough." "Maybe is all I have." Marta looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once, turned, and left. Later that week, a ranch hand passed by the coulee, one of the men from the bunkhouse outside Medora. He stopped at the rim and looked down at the boxcar with its thread of smoke rising from the stovepipe. "Heard about the girl in the iron box," he called down. "Betting pool in Medora says you don't make Christmas. I put $1 on New Year's. Figured I'd give you the benefit of the doubt." Ingrid didn't answer. After a moment, the ranch hand laughed and rode on. The betting pool. Men she had never met were wagering on her death. She went back to cutting wood. The ice storm came on November 16th. Ingrid woke to a sound like 1,000 fingernails tapping on metal, sleet hitting the boxcar's iron shell. By noon, everything was glazed. The grass, the rocks, the bare branches of the cottonwoods, all of it coated in ice, a 1/4 inch thick. The ice meant the cattle couldn't eat. The grass was there, but they couldn't reach it through the frozen crust. Over the next 3 weeks, the ranchers would lose 10% of their herds before the first blizzard even arrived. By spring, they would lose 90%. Ingrid didn't know those numbers yet. She only knew that the ice made everything harder, gathering wood, hauling water from the river, checking her trap line. Every step was a gamble. Every surface wanted to throw her down. She slipped on the 3rd day and cracked her knee against a rock. The bruise spread black across her kneecap. She limped for a week. The ice storm was a warning, and she heard it. She had 1.5 cords of wood. She needed 2.5 minimum, 3 to be safe. She was short by a cord or more, and the weather was turning against her. On December 4th, the first major blizzard arrived. 18 inches of snow in 20 hours. Drifts reaching 6 feet against the boxcar's exposed side. Ingrid couldn't leave her shelter for 2 days. Couldn't even open the outer door without snow cascading in. But the boxcar's location in the coulee, which everyone had said was a death trap, did something unexpected. The snow built up around the car instead of burying it. The drifts acted as insulation, banking against the metal shell, adding another layer between the cold outside and the room inside. On the 2nd day of the blizzard, the temperature outside dropped to -8. Inside Ingrid's room, it held at 47 degrees. She was burning a little more than 1/8 of a cord per week. At that rate, her 1.5 cords would last 12 weeks. The worst cold ran from mid-December through February, roughly 10 weeks. The math almost worked. Almost. January arrived under a gray sky that promised nothing good. The first 8 days were a false thaw. Temperatures climbing to 28 degrees on January 6th. the sun breaking through for the first time in weeks. Ingrid seized the chance. She cut wood with a fury she hadn't known she possessed, adding a quarter cord to her pile. She traded washing for the Bjornson children's outgrown clothes. Extra layers, worn and patched, but warmth she didn't have before. She checked her trap line and found a rabbit, 2 squirrels, protein she desperately needed. By January 8th, she had 2 cords of wood, food stores for 5 weeks, a shelter that was holding, a chance. That evening, the sky turned green-gray. The cattle still alive on the open range began moving east, as if pushed by something coming from the west. Halvor Eriksson stopped at the coulee on his way to check the line. "If you have anything to do outside," he said, "do it now. What's coming? I've seen it once before, in '81. Stay inside no matter what you hear, and pray that contraption of yours holds." He looked at the boxcar, at the thread of smoke from the stovepipe. "If you survive this," he said, "I'll stop telling you you're going to die." It was the closest he had come to a compliment. He left. Ingrid watched him go. The wind was rising. The green-gray sky was spreading from the west like a bruise across the heavens. The temperature, which had been 28 degrees at noon, had dropped to 19 by sundown. She brought in extra wood, filled every container she had with water from the river. Checked the stovepipe, the door seals, the mud chinking. Then she went inside, closed both doors, and waited. On the morning of January 9th, 1887, the temperature at Medora stood at 31 degrees above zero. By nightfall, it would be 15 below. By midnight, 26 below. By dawn, 40 below, and falling. Halvor Eriksson had told her in August that she had the look of someone already dying. Marta Bjornson had told her in September that she was building a frozen tomb. Agnes Thorvaldsen had told her in October that she'd be dead by February. Now she would find out if any of them were right. The blizzard was coming, and she was as ready as she would ever be. The storm hit like a door slamming. At 3 in the afternoon on January 9th, the temperature stood at 18 degrees above zero. The sky to the west was a wall of gray-green that stretched from horizon to horizon. The wind had been building all day, 10 miles an hour at dawn, 20 by noon, gusting to 30 by mid-afternoon. At 3:17, the wall arrived. Ingrid was inside when it hit. She heard it before she felt it. A sound like a freight train, a roar that built and built until it swallowed every other noise. Then the boxcar shuddered. The metal shell rang like a struck bell. Snow began hissing against the exterior, not falling but driving sideways, propelled by winds that would later be measured at 50 miles an hour. She had sealed both doors. The inner room held steady at 46 degrees. Outside, the temperature was plunging, 18 to 12 to 6 to 0 in less than an hour. By nightfall, it would be 15 below. By midnight, 26 below. Ingrid fed the stove, checked the door seals, listened to the wind scream against the iron shell. The metal exterior did what she had built it to do. It stopped the wind absolutely. Every gust that would have found a crack in a wooden cabin, every blast that would have driven snow through sod walls, every knife edge of cold that would have cut through conventional construction, all of it broke against the iron and went no further. Inside the iron shell, inside the wooden room, inside the straw-stuffed gap that held still air like a held breath, Ingrid waited. The first night passed. The temperature dropped to 26 below zero. The inner room held at 44 degrees. The second day, January 10th, dawned darker than any day Ingrid had seen. The snow was so thick, so fine, that it blotted out the sun entirely. The world beyond the boxcar door was a white void. No coulee walls, no river, no sky. Just white in every direction, white that moved and screamed and wanted in. The temperature hit 40 below by noon. Ingrid had prepared for cold. She had not prepared for cold like this. At 40 below, exposed flesh froze in under 2 minutes. At 40 below, the air itself felt solid, a weight that pressed against your chest and made each breath an act of will. At 40 below, the moisture in your eyes could freeze if you blinked too slowly. She stayed inside, fed the stove, watched the temperature in her inner room hold at 42 degrees. 42 degrees while the world outside dropped to 40 below, an 82-degree difference. The design was working, but she was burning wood faster than she'd planned. The cold was relentless, constant, demanding more fuel every hour. At this rate, her 2 cords would last 8 days. The storm could last longer. She reduced the fire. Let the inner room drop to 39 degrees, then 38. Cold but not fatal, uncomfortable but survivable. She had been uncomfortable before. She could be uncomfortable again. The second night passed. The temperature outside hit 42 below. And then, on the morning of January 11th, someone pounded on her door. Eric Bjornsson was dying when Ingrid found him. He had collapsed in the coulee 50 feet from the boxcar, face down in the snow, his body already half buried by the drifting white. She didn't know how long he'd been there, minutes maybe, or an hour. In this cold, it didn't take long. She dragged him inside. He was a big man, nearly 6 feet, maybe 180 pounds, and dragging him through the snow and up into the boxcar took everything she had. Her arms screamed, her back threatened to give. The cold bit at her face, her hands, every inch of exposed skin in the seconds she spent outside. But she got him in. Closed the outer door. Closed the inner door. Laid him on the floor of her room and covered him with every blanket and cloth she owned. He was hypothermic. His skin was gray, his lips blue, his breathing shallow and slow. Both hands were white with frostbite, the fingers waxy and stiff. His left ear was the same, frozen solid. Ingrid had seen frostbite before, on the Minnesota farm. She knew what it meant. If he lived, he would lose fingers, maybe toes, maybe more. If he lived. She built the fire higher than she should have. The inner room climbed to 48 degrees, then 50. She wrapped his hands in cloth, gently, knowing that rubbing would damage the frozen tissue. She made willow bark tea and dribbled it between his lips, hoping the warmth would help, knowing it probably wouldn't. And she waited. Eric woke at sundown. He came back in pieces. A groan, a twitch, a flutter of eyelids. Then his eyes opened, and he stared at the ceiling of Ingrid's inner room without comprehension. "Marta," he said, "the children." "The children are in your cabin. It's 40 below outside. You came looking for water at the river and collapsed." He tried to sit up, failed, tried again. "I have to go back." "You go out that door, you die 50 feet from here, and then I've wasted wood keeping you alive for nothing." He stared at her. This was not the fragile girl the community had dismissed. This was someone else, someone harder, sharper, forged by 5 months of survival. "Why did you take me in?" he asked. Ingrid fed another stick into the stove. The fire crackled. The wind screamed outside. "Because I'm not like the people who threw me out." Eric said nothing, but he stayed. The next 3 days were the longest of Ingrid's life. January 12th. The temperature outside held at 44 below. Eric drifted in and out of consciousness, his body fighting to recover from hypothermia, while his frozen hands and ear began the slow process of dying. 2 fingers on his right hand turned black. The year was worse. The whole outer rim had gone dark. Ingrid gave him willow bark tea for the pain. It did nothing, but it gave him something to hold. She calculated and recalculated. 2 people in the room generated more heat than 1. That helped, but 2 people consumed more food, more water, more wood. Her supplies, already marginal, were draining faster than planned. Wood remaining 1¼ cords. At the rate she was burning, she had maybe 6 days of fuel left. The storm showed no sign of breaking. January 13th, a brief rise in temperature to 30 below gave false hope. Then the second wave hit. By nightfall, the thermometer outside read 46 below, matching the official reading at Bismarck. The wind picked up again, driving snow so fine it seemed to materialize from the air itself. Eric was awake now, lucid, but weak. He watched Ingrid manage the fire with a precision that spoke of desperation. "You're rationing," he said. "I'm surviving." "How much wood do you have?" "Enough." She didn't look at him. "Maybe." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "The Bjornson cabin. Marta will be burning furniture by now. We had 4 cords cut, but that was for a normal winter. This isn't normal." "No. If my family dies while I'm here..." "They won't die because you're here. They'll die or live based on what Marta does with what she has. Same as us. Same as everyone." It was brutal logic, but it was the only logic that mattered. January 14th, the worst day. Ingrid woke to smoke. Not the thin haze she'd grown used to from the patch stove crack. Thick smoke, acrid and choking, filling the inner room. She couldn't see the far wall. She couldn't breathe without coughing. The crack in the firebox had opened again. The clay patch, stressed by 4 days of constant firing, had crumbled away. Smoke was pouring into the room instead of up the stovepipe. She had minutes to fix it. Maybe less. In an enclosed space, smoke inhalation could kill faster than cold. She pulled the burning wood from the stove with her bare hands, throwing it onto the dirt floor, stamping out the flames. The metal of the firebox seared her palm. She would have blisters for weeks, but she didn't stop. She scraped the crumbled clay from the crack with her knife, mixed new clay with ash from the fire, working by feel in the thick smoke. "Open the door," Eric said, coughing. "Let it clear." Open the door and we lose all the heat. 46 below outside. We'd never get the temperature back up. She packed the clay into the crack, pressed it firm, held it in place while her lungs burned and her eyes streamed. The smoke began to thin. The draft through the stovepipe reasserted itself. In 10 minutes, the air was breathable. In 15, she had the fire rebuilt. The room temperature had dropped to 34 degrees during the crisis, just above freezing. Another few minutes without the stove, and it would have dropped below. And once a space that small got cold, warming it back up consumed enormous amounts of fuel. She had fixed the problem. Barely. Wood remaining, 3/4 of a cord. She made a decision. The stove would burn only at night during the coldest hours. During the day, they would survive on body heat and the residual warmth in the walls and the straw insulation. The temperature in the inner room dropped to 36 degrees by afternoon. Cold, genuinely cold, but still above freezing, still survivable. Eric watched her without speaking. Finally, he said, "I thought you were just a girl playing at survival. I thought you'd be dead before the first snow." "Everyone thought that." "I was wrong." Ingrid fed another stick into the stove. The fire caught. The temperature began its slow climb back toward 40. "People are usually wrong about me," she said. January 15th dawned clear. Ingrid woke to silence. After 5 days of constant wind, constant roar, Constant screaming pressure against the iron shell. Silence. She opened the inner door, opened the outer door, and saw blue sky. The temperature was 22 below zero. It felt warm. After 46 below, 22 below felt like spring. The coulee was transformed. Snow had drifted to 8 feet against the south side of the boxcar, burying the lower half of the structure entirely. The cottonwoods along the river were bent and broken, their branches stripped by the wind. The world was white and still and utterly changed, but smoke was rising from the stovepipe, and Ingrid was alive. She stepped out of the boxcar for the first time in 5 days. The cold bit at her face, but she didn't care. She walked to the rim of the coulee and looked toward the Bjornson homestead, 2 miles north. Smoke there too. Thin, but present. Marta had survived. The children had survived. Ingrid went back inside. Eric was sitting up, his blackened fingers wrapped in cloth, his face drawn with pain but alive. "Storm's over," she said. "I heard." "Your family's cabin is still smoking." Eric closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. "Thank you," he said, "for taking me in, for keeping me alive." Ingrid didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She just went to the stove and began building up the fire again, wood remaining half a cord. But the worst was over, and she had made it. The aftermath came in waves. First, the counting. 7 dead in the Medora area alone. Gregor Kincaid, the rancher, found frozen in his own barn. A traveling salesman, never identified, discovered in a ravine near Sentinel Butte. 5 others, names that Ingrid didn't know, lives that had ended while hers continued. Then the stories. The Murphy claim, 3 miles south. The father had gone for wood on January 13th and never returned. His body would be found in March, 50 yards from the cabin door. The mother and children survived by burning interior walls and huddling together for warmth. 2 children lost feet to frostbite. Marta Bjornson had burned furniture, bed frames, even part of the cabin floor to keep her children alive. 1 child had frostbitten toes. Another had a respiratory infection that would linger for months. But they were alive. 90% of the cattle on the northern ranges were dead. Theodore Roosevelt, at his ranch near Medora, would write that the disaster had destroyed him financially. The open-range cattle industry, which had built the region, was finished. It would never recover. Against this backdrop of death and ruin, word began to spread about the girl in the iron box. Halvor Eriksson came to the coulee 3 days after the storm broke. He had been working the line, clearing snow, documenting damage, counting the dead. His face was gray with exhaustion. His eyes held nothing but weariness. He stopped at the coulee's rim and looked down at the boxcar. Smoke rose from the stovepipe. The structure was half buried in drifted snow, but it was intact, unbroken. He walked down the slope, knocked on the outer door. Ingrid opened it. Behind her, Eric Bjornson sat wrapped in blankets, his bandaged hands visible, his face pale but alive. Erickson stared for a long moment. "I've pulled frozen bodies out of proper cabins with full wood stores," he said. Families with 8 cords cut and stacked, men who knew what they were doing. He looked at the walls, the straw poking from the gaps, the small stove with its patched firebox. "I told you you'd be dead by Christmas. I told you that iron box would be your coffin." He stopped, took a breath. "I was wrong. You figured out something I didn't know. That air pocket, the grass in the gap, I never would have thought of it. You're alive because you didn't listen to me." It wasn't an apology. Erickson wasn't the type for apologies. But it was something else, something harder for a man like him to give. It was respect. The others, Ingrid said. The ones who died. Did any of them have what I had? Iron shells? No. Then they never had a chance. No, Erickson said. They didn't. He turned to go, then stopped. I'll be telling people what I saw here. Anyone asks how to survive a winter like this, I'm sending them to you. He left. Ingrid watched him climb the coulee slope and disappear over the rim. She had spent 5 months waiting for someone to believe her. Now, finally, someone did. Marta Bjornsson came next. She arrived on January 20th to collect her husband. She had walked 2 miles through thigh-deep snow, leaving her children with a neighbor to find the man she'd thought was dead. When she saw Eric sitting up, alive, tears streaming down her face, was the first emotion Ingrid had seen her show in 5 months. But then Marta looked around. The inner room was crude, rough lumber, mud chinking, a floor of packed earth. It smelled of smoke and sweat and too many days sealed inside. But it was warm, noticeably, undeniably warm. How is it so warm in here? Marta asked. The wind outside was 5 below zero. Inside, the room held at 44 degrees. Ingrid explained. The gap, the straw, the iron windbreak, the reduced volume. Marta listened, really listened this time, not with the skepticism of September, but with the desperate attention of someone who had nearly lost everything. I said you'd freeze in that metal box, Marta said when Ingrid finished. I said wait until real winter came. I was wrong. You were smarter than all of us. She asked to understand better, how to stuff walls, how to seal gaps, how to think about air as insulation instead of obstacle. Ingrid showed her everything, the canvas for condensation, the straw density, the door seals, all of it. Come spring, Marta said, I'm adding an inner wall to our cabin, your way. Eric will help when his hands heal. If his hands heal. Marta looked at her husband, at his blackened fingers. He'll lose 3, maybe 4. The doctor in Dickinson will know more. She turned back to Ingrid. But he's alive to lose them, because of you. They left together, Marta supporting Eric across the snow. At the coulee's rim, Marta turned back. I judged you, she called down. When they put you out, when they said what they said about you, I judge you the same as everyone else. Ingrid waited. I was wrong about that too. They disappeared over the rim. Ingrid stood in the boxcar door watching the empty coulee. For 5 months, she had been the Thorvaldsen girl, the liar, the fallen woman, the fool building a coffin. Now she was something else. She wasn't sure yet what to call it, but it felt like standing on solid ground for the first time since August. Boss. The conversions came slowly at first, then faster. A sheepherder south of Medora built an inner room in an abandoned railroad storage shack. He used hay instead of straw, canvas instead of mud, but the principle was the same. He survived February with half the fuel his neighbors burned. The Johansson family, who had lost their barn to the January storm, took over a damaged rail car and followed Ingrid's design exactly. 6 people in 100 square feet, but everyone warm, everyone alive. By fall of 1887, 11 boxcar conversions using the double shell technique had been documented between Medora and Glendive, a stretch of 120 miles of rail. The section hand started calling the design the iron lung, a wooden room breathing inside a metal shell. Ingrid didn't patent anything. She didn't charge for advice. When people came asking, and they came, more each month, she showed them. Walked them through the boxcar, explained the gaps and the grass and the doors within doors. I would have died if Erickson hadn't given me that broken stove, she told them. I'm not going to charge people for something I survived by luck and stubbornness. By the end of 1887, the Northern Pacific Railroad, which had abandoned the original boxcar as worthless, quietly stopped scrapping derelict cars in the region. They had recognized what Ingrid had proven, that a metal shell, properly used, could save lives. Agnes Thorvaldsen never came to the coulee. She heard about her stepdaughter's survival, about the man Ingrid had saved, about the community's changing regard. Word travels fast in small places, and Medora was small. Agnes didn't visit, didn't apologize, didn't admit she had lied, but she stopped telling people Ingrid was a thief, stopped threatening legal action. When someone mentioned Ingrid at a gathering, Agnes left the room. It wasn't conversion, but it was defeat. And for Ingrid, that was enough. Her father came in March. Peter Thorvaldsen rode to the coulee on a gray afternoon, his horse picking through the last of the winter snow. He didn't knock on the door. He just stood at the rim and waited. Ingrid came out. They looked at each other across the slope. The father who had let her be thrown away, the daughter who had survived anyway. He had a crate in his wagon, nails, rope, a proper axe with a solid handle. "You should have this," he said. "Should have had it in August." Ingrid climbed the slope, took the crate, set it down. "Thank you," she said. She didn't invite him in. Peter Thorvaldsen waited a moment longer. Then he nodded once, turned his horse, and rode away. Ingrid carried the crate down to the boxcar. Proper tools. The tools she should have had from the beginning. She was glad to have them, but she had survived without them. That mattered more. By the fall of 1887, 11 families had adopted the double shell method. Section Foreman Halvor Eriksson began recommending the technique to stranded travelers and impoverished homesteaders, describing what he'd seen in the coulee with a precision that came from years of documenting what worked and what failed. The Northern Pacific's informal policy of preserving derelict cars spread quietly along the line. Ingrid never accepted payment for teaching her method. "I didn't invent anything," she told those who asked. "I just paid attention to what the air wanted to do." In the spring of 1888, Ingrid Thorvaldsen turned 19 and filed a homestead claim on the coulee where she had survived. The Homestead Act required claimants to be 21 or heads of household, and her year of independent survival had made her a head of household by any measure that mattered. She proved up the claim in 1893, built a proper farmhouse around the original boxcar, and kept one wall of the inner room intact as a root cellar. She married a Norwegian immigrant named Anders Lindqvist in 1895. They had 4 children, 3 of whom survived to adulthood. She lived on that land for 53 years, dying on September 14, 1941, at age 72. The homestead remained in the family until 1987, 100 years after the winter that should have killed her. On January 9, 1887, the temperature at Medora dropped 46 degrees in 7 hours. Halvor Eriksson, who had survived 11 Dakota winters and pulled 3 frozen bodies from snowdrifts, had told a 17-year-old girl in August, "A girl alone won't last till Christmas. When they find you in spring, the coyotes will have scattered what's left across the coulee." The coyotes found nothing to scatter. What they found, in a coulee 3 miles west of Medora, was smoke rising from a stovepipe, a wooden room inside an iron shell. A girl who had listened to what everyone said was impossible, then built what no one believed would work. Ingrid Thorvaldsen did not survive because she was stronger than winter. She survived because she understood something the veterans had forgotten, that the right wall in the right place, with the right gap between, could turn a frozen coffin into a home. On the worst night, when the temperature fell to 46 below and men froze in their beds, her iron box held at 42 degrees. Some walls keep things out. Hers kept everything in.